Okay, here's some more thoughts on immigration. Um, so, the problem, as I see it, is that immigration law has always traditionally, has certain standards. Let's just start with when you fly into this country from another country or come in on a train or a bus, and they check your documents. Um, it's traditionally there's zero tolerance for something being wrong. If you don't have the correct visa or whatever is required to come into this country, proof of citizenship or whatever, you don't come in. It's always been that way. And the same way with, like applying for a visa or, flying into the country. If you don't have the correct documentation, you're turned around. There's no discretion that's ever been used to where the agent can say, well, I think you're a, pretty upstanding person. I'm going to make an exception in this case. No, they've never had that kind of discretion, or at least they've never used that kind of discretion before in immigration. We know that in law enforcement, they can have enforcement priorities. You get something stolen from you, somebody steals your phone number or something like that, and you report the theft or whatever. Yeah, right. That's a low priority. Cops are not going to be sent out to try to investigate and enforce that law. So there's always been enforcement priorities for law enforcement. So one of the problems with immigration law enforcement is that what about, they talk about equity. What about equal treatment of people? So if you have a zero tolerance for anything being out of order and not correct, for people entering the country through a port of entry of some kind, is it fair to have a different standard for people who sneak in or overstay a visa or are here illegally and then get stopped? So that's the dilemma that I would pose to the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops in terms of moral dilemma. So is that what's the equity there? So this is what appears to me. What's happened before is that so the law enforcement priority, the allocation of resources, allegedly has been to look for people who are here illegally who have committed some other crime. And this is the majority of Americans agree with that priority. Yeah, but that's your priority. But what if you sweep up other people who are here illegally in the process? That's not what you were looking for, but now you've found people who are here illegally. So should they get a different standard of the law than the people who are stopped at the border? Is that fair? Is that equal justice? I'm not saying that it should be like that, but obviously that's the problem, is that you have strict law enforcement of immigration in every area of legal immigration going on. So then they want to say that, well, as long as you lie and cheat and steal, we can get you a more lenient standard. I'm not sure that's not how I see as being fair. Or I don't think most people, if they really thought about it, would say that's fair. What about the people who got sent back to wherever country because they didn't cross a T or dot an I on an immigration form when they tried to come in here? I'm not saying it necessarily should be like that, but that's the way it's always been. Maybe the answer is to afford discretion everywhere. That would be great. Afford some mercy and discretion everywhere, but that's hard to do because they don't want to do that. They don't want to just delegate that kind of discretion to a border patrol agent to decide whether they think this person or that person ought to have an exception made for them. So that's the problem. And then they have immigration courts, so people wind up in immigration courts. And again, the same standards applied to all of them. So I think that's the problem, is that they can have the law enforcement priority of looking for people who are here illegally, who also have some other crime committed, and that's their stated priority, and it is their priority probably, you know. But the problem is in that process finding other people. Let's say you're regular law enforcement and you're a homicide detective, and you come across a different homicide, not the one you're investigating. So are you going to just ignore that? I don't think so. You have an obligation under a duty to turn that over to other investigators. So yeah, so I think this is the problem that the Catholic bishops are not confronting. They're not confronting the real situation. They're grandstanding out there. The posturing, the virtue signaling. Oh, look how merciful we are. Yeah, but that's bogus. They're not merciful at all. Because to be merciful would be to tell the truth, like I'm doing right now. Okay? So tell the truth. Admit the reality of the situation. Maybe it all can be changed in some way. But don't vilify these people that are just doing their jobs. And they're not trying to be cruel to anyone. They're just doing their jobs. And according to the Catholic Church, that's what they're supposed to do. The executives of the executors of the law are obligated to execute the laws. That's been written about by many popes in the past. That's their duty. That's what the church teaches, and that's what they're doing. So maybe nobody likes the fact that these other illegal people are getting swept up in the process, but that's not the fault of the process. That's another fault. Probably the people who encouraged all that illegal immigration, they should look right in the mirror when they want to point a finger at someone for causing the misery.